now do is move in to our first keynote speaker, Portia Kennel. Portia is Senior Advisor of the Buffett Early Childhood Fund, and prior she was Senior Vice President of Program Innovation at Start Early, which is formerly Ounce of Prevention, as well as the Founding Executive Director of Educare Learning. And in her current role, Portia leads efforts to develop family engagement program models that empower parents as a force of change in families, schools, and communities. Portia has over 25 years of experience developing, implementing, and scaling effective evidence-based early childhood programs, home visiting, and family support models for children and families. And why we asked Portia to speak today, through her work as an administrator, she's been influenced by measurement throughout her career, and she brings a really unique perspective in early childhood measurement. And as a side note, it took some convincing to get her to present. When I first mentioned I wanted her to present, she said, "I'm not a measurement expert. Why are you asking me?" But it took a little coaxing. And I do truly believe that her expertise and the use of measurement in the field and the way it is used within systems by administrators, by practitioners, it paints a very unique picture that I think is important for our tool as well as for the field of early childhood. So thank you, Portia, for accepting after a little coaxing. Portia's presentation is Rethinking Measurement in Early Childhood, What Matters.
Thank you, Tyson. It took a little bit of coaching, but I'm glad I'm here. Hello, everyone out there in virtual land. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are geographically. Listen, I want to thank the University of Oregon, Phil Fisher, and the Center for Translational Neuroscience, and Tyson Barker and the EC PRISM group and their teams for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. So let's get at it. First of all, I want to set a little bit of context for my remarks today. I was asked to share perspectives of program practitioners in early childhood, to bring the perspective of program leaders, practitioners, and other helpers into this virtual room. To that end, I will be sharing key takeaways from conducting focused interviews about measurement with a number of early childhood leaders across the country. But before I do that, I have to say this every time I'm asked to say a few words. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the current state that program leaders and staff and families find themselves in, specifically the impact of the pandemic and the hardship that continues to be present in programs and staff and families and communities. And especially the hardship that's been caused in low-income communities that are underserved, under-resourced. These have been difficult times, and that is the context right now in which program practitioners, leaders, helpers are continuing to outreach to families and children. They're on the front lines, and while there have been disruptions in services from time to time, for the most part, staff have continued to reach out to families and children. Staff have been what I call the constant disruptors of the cycle of distress that has been caused by the pandemic. So I wanted to lay that out there because that is the context in which we are operating right now, all of us. So let's talk about what I'm going to do today. First of all, I'm going to share information about the current state, the role and impact of measurement in early childhood programs as seen through the eyes and experiences of a group of early childhood program leaders as they reflected on their collective experiences, and I reflected on mine too. And I want to share that information with you, and I want to leave you with some key challenges to consider as we, practitioners, researchers, funders, policymakers, families, and community stakeholders collaborate together to rethink early childhood measurement going forward. Okay, so next slide. So I'm calling this section Conversations from the Field. In other words, voices from the field. These are the voices of the executives and program leaders that I interviewed. So the question is, who are these program leaders? Who are they? Let's say these were over 14 program leaders in early childhood, the majority of which were members of the Educare Learning Network who operate Educare schools, which is a birth to 5 high quality center-based programs, although some of our programs also do home visiting. These were rich conversations, but I'm going to focus on the key takeaways for this presentation. But the leaders and program executives had a lot to say. And the Educare schools across the country, it numbered 25. Last year, they served over 3,500 children. And this year, we're not only talking to those leaders, but some other leaders outside of our network who, in addition to Educare schools, are members and provide early Head Start childcare partnerships. So in addition to the 3,500 children that we touch within the network, there are hundreds of other birth to 3 children in which early childhood program leaders are partnering with community-based centers and family childcare homes. So just to give you a little slip of understanding about who I'm speaking about and who they represent. The field is a large field, but I think that what I have to say will resonate and give us something to think about in terms of no matter what the setting is, the early childhood setting is, there are some things here too that we might want to carry forward. So let's begin with where we are now. So where are we now? Next slide, please. Now, to begin this section, I'm going to begin with what I call, I guess they call in Reggio Emilia, a provocation. So I'm going to begin with this quote that's been adopted. It's a quote from Albert Einstein, but Portia took the liberty of tweaking it a little bit so it would be appropriate for this situation. So what the quote says, and I want us to think with me as we talk the rest of my time, what matters cannot always be measured, and what can be measured cannot always matter, does not always matter. Now, Albert said that what matters cannot always be counted, but I put measured in there. So what matters cannot always be counted, and what can be measured does not always matter. I want us to sit with that a little bit because therein lies our dilemma as practitioners, as researchers, as other stakeholders face the creation of measures that matter and deciding what really matters. We're going to have to collaborate and work together to determine what matters most to support children's development and learning. And program leaders expressed a desire to have a better understanding of what matters and what measures work for whom and within what context. So, with that said, next slide, please. In the ideal world of if what is working now, what am I talking about? What are the leaders saying about this? And basically, they're saying that it was unanimous across all of the leaders that I spoke to that measurement is an essential tool and provides concrete evidence of the impact of their programs and their services. It helps them maintain quality, it helps them achieve outcomes, and it's a critical component of their continuous improvement process. Measurement and program evaluation is the way in which leaders are able to tell their story about the impact of their program and services on the children and families that they serve. It's an essential component of their work. They're with us right now. This is how it is. And we've come a long way in embracing measurement. It helps leaders make program decisions that hopefully increase the success of their programs in terms of the impact and outcomes. It drives their continuous improvement process and allows the practitioners, hear this part, to feel validated regarding the work that they're doing with children and families. Because we had a feeling and we knew something was going on, and measurement helps give description and words to describe what we're experiencing in our programs with children and families. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. This back one more. It should be, okay, right. Thank you. Thank you. What else is working? Measurement has supported high quality teaching practices. It has provided specific information regarding the areas of improvement for specific teachers. It focuses on practices that address specific challenges children are facing. So in other words, it's contributed to deliberate decision-making about the professional development of teachers too, because they've been able to identify what practices work with what children and under what circumstances. And it allows programs and staff to place more intentional and deliberate emphasis on practices that focuses on different challenges that children are facing. And this is really, really critical. I think the other thing I want to emphasize that the leaders said was that they really would like more professional development collaboration with researchers to help explain what measurement means in the context of their programs. Sometimes program staff have a difficult time making the connection. Okay, we got a measurement, we've got observations, we've got all of these things, and parents' perspective. How does it all fit into a coherent understanding of what's happening in the growth and development and learning of a child? So and sometimes teachers are disconnected from those measures. They're like, what does that have to do with what I'm doing in the classroom? Can somebody build a bridge from that measurement result to what is actually happening in the classroom? And that's one good thing about the EC Prison Group. They're going to help practitioners like me and others make that connection. So that's in the current state. That's what the leaders have shared with me is working well. And when measurement works, all of these things are happening at once in a program. So let's talk about the next slide, which is, where do we go from here? If this is the foundational things that we heard from the voices in the field about how measurement has impacted their program, if these are the areas in which they have been impacted and in which they are in consensus about, have added value, meaning, and specificity and rigor to their programs, where do we go from here? Well, once again, I want to go to a quote. I want to have a provocation here. Stay with me now. Here's the quote. Next slide, please. A system of education is not one thing, nor does it have a single definite object, nor is it a mere matter of schools. Education is that whole system of human training within and without the schoolhouse walls, which molds and develops children. Once again, Portia took the liberty of changing it a little bit. W.E. Du Bois said this, and the quote ended in develops men. I took that out and put develops children because I believe that's, and in my conversation with the leaders, this is a message that we want you, researchers and other stakeholders that help create these measures, to know. If we believe this, and the data has shown us for years that other factors beyond the walls of education and care systems have a powerful impact on families and children's learning and development. Now, if we believe this, then we're rethinking our system. Then here are some recommendations that program leaders are challenging us to think about as we consider the possibility of rethinking measurement in early childhood. Next slide, please. Okay, we're rethinking now. Here's some guidelines for us to embrace. The first thing we got to do, well, maybe it's not the first thing. These are not in order, but they're important. They're the key takeaways. We need to shift from a deficit-based measurement system to an asset-based system. We need a system that is holistic and comprehensive. We need a system that considers all the factors that support children's learning and development. We know that a multitude of factors impact children's learning, and we cannot have or continue to have isolated measurements just talking about one thing without broadening the framework first to an asset-based focus, as well as broadening it to consider what we already know are additional factors that impacts children's learning, growth, and development. Now, this last one, the leaders, and I agree, because I've been also a Head Start program director, measurement should not be used as a high-stakes single measure of program success. Your program is successful based on this one measure, or it's not. And that's what we mean about having an asset-based measurement system. We need, as we work together, to have more clarity about what can realistically be measured. Practitioners struggle with measurement when it's used in a high-stakes manner that decides my program is successful, my program has failed, because there's a much more complexity of things that's happening within a program. And I'm just going to use this one example. I'm not singling out Head Start because they made some changes, but the class became the single measure that would trigger a recompetition when the class was never created to be the measure of success of a program, but it was used in that way, and it caused program leaders to struggle a bit with that measurement. So one of the tasks of us today is to help bring clarity about what measures can realistically measure what. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. We're still rethinking measurement. We need a measurement framework built upon relationship-based approach. In other words, education, teaching, and learning is a complex relationship process. And that process cannot be oversimplified. And the truth of the matter, hang in there with me, is that children develop in an environment of relationships. Early childhood practitioners are engaged in developing relationships with children that promote children's optimal development and learning. It's a relationship. And every measurement should encourage and empower teachers and other adult helpers involved in children's lives. It should lift them up, encourage and empower them to be the best practitioner they can be in the context of this learning relationship with a child. The other thing that we need to think about is that we need more collaboration tools between researchers and practitioners about integration of data. We got a lot. The good news is we're measuring, we got a lot of data, but we got data from multiple sources. We got the teacher's perspective. We got the measurement results. We got the parents' knowledge. We got all of this. And sometimes program practitioners have a struggle to integrate and connect the measurement data with the other knowledge and observations they have, as well as with the parents' knowledge and observations about their child. Many times it's difficult to come up with an integrated, coherent plan for children, especially if there are conflicting measurement data points and perspectives. So we need to collaborate more around that so we can come together with one comprehensive, coherent plan that all of the stakeholders, including staff, parents, measurement scientists, can agree upon. Okay, so next slide, please. The next part of this rethinking measurement has to do with building and embedding a framework of racial equity and social justice and economic justice into our framework, or into the foundation of what we're creating together. We need more culturally and logistically responsive measurements. We need researchers that represent and kind of look like the population that's being studied. We need the system to include those who are most impacted by the measurement we're creating. And it means sustain family and community involvement in the decision-making, and power must be shared. We don't bring them in and say, thank you very much, see you later. We want them in this new rethinking of measurement. They're going to be at the table, and we're going to collaborate together. Teams conducting research should have representatives on that research team that have experienced the lived experience of the population that's been studied. There is value to populations' lived experience, and we have to include that in the framework. And it is a necessity that we have researchers on the research team that can also give insight into the lived experience of the population that's being studied. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. I'm ending this section, Rethinking Measurements, with two mantras for us to take with us. No more research without me. So that means not about me without me at the table, whoever the population is, and that we are in this new rethinking, shifting from doing to doing with. So let's keep that as I close this section of our rethinking measurement. Now I'm going to get into the next slide, please. This other thing that I want to leave with. I'm going to be closing soon. This is functional versus standardized measures. Now, I toyed with this because the leaders' conversation that I had, we used the word formative, but I tweaked it again because I want you to see the definition that's behind this. What the leaders are saying, this representative sample across the country of leaders is saying, we need more functional assessment measures to be used in real time in everyday settings. And we need to train teachers together to use those functional assessments to improve the learning process. So what am I talking about, this functional assessment? Here's a definition that I'd like to share with you and for you to think with me about. Next slide, please. A functional assessment is a continuous collaborative process, accent on collaborative process, that combines observing, asking meaningful questions, listening to family stories, and analyzing individual child skills and behaviors within naturally occurring everyday routines. That's what the teachers want. They want to know how this relates to the everyday routine when I have these children in my classroom. The everyday routines and activities across multiple situations and settings. Let's think about that for a moment. This is really what we as program practitioners and leaders would like you to consider. And this is a collaborative process that values all the stakeholders' input about a child's learning and development. Okay, let's move on. Finally, I want to leave you with this messages. I am going to do an impassionate plea for family engagement measures. We need them. We're not capturing in most of our early childhood programs. I know some of you are, but we're not really capturing what is happening with family engagement in our programs and how does that relate to and connect to and support what's happening in the classroom. So what we need here is a fundamental mindset shift from family engagement as an add-on in an early childhood program to a fundamental, essential component of early childhood practice. That's what we need. And we need more study of teaching practices. I mean, we've already got more study of teaching practice. We need to continue that. I'm not saying we should stop. But right now we have more study on the teaching practices side than we've had on the family engagement side. We need to study the family engagement side. We need to identify effective family engagement practices and measure their impact. Please, I'm pleading with you. We need help with that. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So, as I close today, I want to say to you that well, let me see if I can summarize this quickly for you. I believe in the conversations that I have had with this sample of program leaders across the country, that taking this approach will allow us to develop more impactful interventions because our measures will have and take into account all the critical factors that we know have a dramatic impact on children's development, health, and educational outcomes. Make sense? Incorporating these ideas as we rethink measurement in the early childhood system would be, in my humble opinion, the most disruptive innovation that the field can do right now. If we in the field, hope for different results, then we must do something radically different than what we've been doing in the last 50 years. Wait for it now, while at the same time preserving and building on the progress and successes that have brought us this far. Think about that. We must work together, researchers, practitioners, policymakers, funders, families, and communities to develop a radically different way of doing business. I want to leave you with that thought. I want to thank the program leaders that shared their thoughts, next slide, with me. And thanks again to the University of Oregon, Phil Fisher, Tyson, Barker, for inviting me to share this program perspective with you today.